So the balance patch will happen at April 15th. And we get the update preview right now. And I will go over all the changes and I will explain what I think about them. And will also give my, let's say, take in if they will change a lot of stuff. Because I think that's what a lot of people are interested in, is will it change their builds or will it not affect anything? And I can already tell you this is not the biggest patch. It's more like this update will largely be a tuning update. And Elementalist, on the contrary to a lot of beliefs, we actually get a lot of buffs here. So we get a lot of buffs regarding especially Hammer. A lot of Hammer skills gets power buffs in PvE. And we get a buff actually to Polaric Leap, which is interesting. And now applies weakness as well, which is a condition that Elementalist really doesn't have too much access to if you don't play Lightning Rod. So that's really interesting. But also increased Flame Uprising, which is, I think, the 2 skill from Fire and on Sword. That's really nice. You have now 2 stacks. That's a buff, you know. That's straight up a buff. You get 2 stacks instead of 1 and reduce the duration from 6 to 4 seconds. So the duration is reduced, not halved, but reduced, and we get double the amount. So you get, let's say, more just value from the condition already. You get more damage from this change. And don't forget, you're playing World vs. World in PvP with this one. And that means if you have a longer duration, typically it's very likely to get cleansed. But if it's a short duration, it's very likely to actually deal all the damage. So this is a double buff in that sense. This is really good. I'm not sure if that will make any Weaver build or something Condi build with Sword typically matter. Just one change, probably not, but it's the right direction. Regarding the Hammer buffs, that's definitely good, especially if you liked my One for All build or my Celestial Hammer Catalyst build. That's just straight up crazy. They buffed it again. So Hammer apparently in solo builds is absolutely insane now. So nice. We like that. Crazy buffs here. We get some Weaver buffs. So Weaver is interesting because Weaver is not getting changes that I would say affect a lot. Yes, we get more damage in PvE, but yeah, that's good, I guess. But I think Weaver needs some help in competitive modes regarding stability, regarding protection. I think that's not changing anything for competitive modes. Catalyst gets an interesting rework in World vs. World. So you now need to have Spectacular Sphere equipped, the trait, to actually get the quickness. Normally you would get the quickness in air, but now it only gives you fury and you need to have the trait to get quickness too. I think that makes sense because then you have to invest more of your traits into this to get quickness. I think that makes sense. That makes Catalyst a little bit more balanced and you have to drop the Staunch Aura, which gives you the stability on auras. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a very fair change because it's not changing anything if you have the Spectacular Sphere trait, but it changes if you have the Staunch Aura trait. You don't have access to quickness. I think that's totally fair. So Engineer is interesting. They nerfed a little bit the damage from the Condi mech and give more power to Power Mech. I think Power Mech was really underused and now it's a little bit better because they give rival buffs in PvE only, which is, I think, fair. I mean, it was a really easy build to play and I think it's good if they buff it to make it a little bit more worthwhile to play. They nerf a little bit of just Holosmith damage, and that's okay, I guess. I think Holosmith was really good in World vs. World, so that's where they nerf it. And they buff Super Elixir, and we get to that in a second. Why? Because they will buff Holosmith with the Heartlight Arena, so that is the thing that gives you a lot of protection pulses, and the Heat Therapy in PvP. So they really want to get the, how's it called? Prot Holo back. So a build where you play a Bruisery Holosmith in PvP that cleanses condition whenever it applies protection to it and has a lot of protection uptime. So I think that's an interesting idea, but I think I'm also quite scared because this build is on paper already broken because having protection makes you get less damage from power-based builds and having a lot of cleanses makes you immune to Condis. So what are you going to die to if that's going to be the case? So I think they should be really careful with that one. But I think they made the right choice here to nerf a little bit of the damage from Holosmith because it was a little bit better than all the other DPS in World vs. World. And then we have some changes to Mechanist Yeah, I don't know. Mechanist, just some more power damage changes, and that's about it. But we also got some changes to support scrapper in World vs. World. I think it was the same as Holosmith, just in the support compartment. I think it's still very playable as well as Holosmith. They just got a little bit nudged down to be a little bit more on par with the other supports or DPS respectively. I think that makes sense. Yeah. So I think Engineer buffs and nerfs, I guess that's how it goes, and mostly affect only some part of the game and not all of it. So I think if you're an Engineer enjoyer, you will probably be okay with it. Nothing too crazy changed here, I have to say. So Guardian is interesting. This is the pistol skill that is really annoying to use, and now it's more consistent. That's good, and the cooldown in PvP and World vs. World is down. I guess that's fine. I like this change. Regarding Firebrand, they reduced the dormant duration, so how often it activates the passive in PvE and PvP, which is interesting. 30 seconds off of this one is actually crazy, but it's not that crazy good of a, let's say, buff, because typically you have either the passive not up anyway, or you just use it passively, and it's not crazy that much of a change, but I think it's a good buff. We get some page reduction again to PvP Firebrand buffs, I guess that makes sense. And World vs. World nerfs. Yeah, I mean, Firebrand is very, very popular in World vs. World, so I guess it makes sense to nerf the quickness, because that's the general gist of this patch. We nerf quickness access in World vs. World. It will not be as Alacrity, where we have no Alacrity to share at all, but it will be more intentionally. So you have to use a skill to give quickness for the next 2 seconds or something, and not apply quickness all the time. We also have that here with the Catalyst change, that we don't have too much quickness share, or it's a little bit harder to come by. Tyrant's Momentum got a little bit nerfed in PvE. That means that your Condi Bender is a little bit lower in DPS, but so I think you stack up to 5 of those, so it means 5% damage nerf. Yeah, that's notable for sure, but it's still a very good build. It will not change anything regarding your gear, and you will still be able to play Willbender with a very high benchmark. Will not be the highest one, probably, but still. So Guardian overall, I would say, got, for the most part, actually very little and mostly buffs, just some small changes. I think that's okay. Mesmer is interesting, because Mesmer did not get a lot of changes, but the changes that they add are actually affecting stuff. That's the only class where I would say all of the changes are somewhat affecting. So the first one is Illusion of Membrane. So this gave you condition damage when you got Chaos Aura, and now you get a buff, yeah, that you get when you get Chaos Aura that increases your condi damage. I think that's not a nerf or a buff, it's just a change to make it more consistent, because, for example, Elementalist with Tempest had that, with Tempest's area. So I think it makes sense to make a little bit more consistency, but it's not really a balance change, it's just a vision change, so that you can see it more clearly. But we get buffs to Greatsword. I think that's a lot of people's favorite weapon for range. I think Greatsword is really nice. Mirror Blade and Phantasmal Berserker just get a buff. It's good. I like it. It's very outclassed by Spear for the most part, and I think it's good to have some option for range power damage as well. So I think that's a good change for sure. Especially as the Phantasmal Berserker is in all game modes, so that can help in World vs. World, it can help in PvP. It's really good. Really, really good. Then we have a change to Chronomancer. So this is the trait that you use on a DPS Chronomancer, and that makes now the damage modifier of your Phantasms normally would be 100% in PvE, so it will just deal the same amount of damage that it did the first time it spawned. It will now deal more damage the second time it spawns, which is really interesting, because that's a damage buff, of course, but it's a damage buff that is backloaded, so that means that the first Phantasm you spawn will actually have less damage than the second one, and that means you are very bad in bursting, and that means you are even worse than you were before in that sense, because your damage will be higher in total if you have a long phase, but if you have a short phase, your damage will stay the same. And it was already a build that was really unique, because it was a power build that had a ramp up time, and now it will have an even higher ramp up time, which is really, really fun, and it's a really cool design, but I'm not sure if it will be really a power meta build, because it's just, why would you use a power build that is having a ramp up time? Why would you use that? In which circumstances is that actually working out? only if the damage in total will be higher than all other Mesmer builds, then it might see a play. But I think it's a cool change. Then again, we get the quickness nerf in World vs. World. It's still playable, it's just a little bit less duration. I guess that makes sense. And then we got a change, nerf to PvE, Power Virtuoso. Phantasmal Blades was probably the best damage skill that you had on Power Virtuoso. It was a trait and gave you the most damage. And now it got actually a significant nerf. I would say this now brings Power Virtuoso actually in a spot where I would say it's not the highest DPS option anymore for Mesmer, Power Mesmer. I think Power Mirage will have higher damage on paper. And with this change, maybe even Power Chronomancer. I'm not sure, I did not try it yet. But that might actually make Chronomancer the highest power DPS option of Mesmer. Maybe. Very interesting. I think Power Virtuoso will still be completely fine. It will just not be as crazy as it was before because it has range damage, it has distortion. It's just very, very overloaded in PvE. So I think, again, nothing too crazy changes here, but it nudges the overperforming build like Power Virtuoso a little bit down to bring it more in line with the other builds. The Grasping Darkness gets a telegraph, which is weird because the telegraph will probably not be really visible in the 50 versus 50 fight, but again, I guess better than nothing. And the number of targets goes down. I guess that's also just funny because I think it's just a skill that actually looks like it could hit multiple people, now only hits 3, but I guess that's fine. And with that, we also get the reduced range from Spectral Grasp, which is actually a huge nerf for all game modes, especially in PvE where you used to pull in a lot of stuff. With this, it was actually insane. It was probably one of the best pull abilities in the game, and now it's worse. I think that's fair, but it will definitely be a big nerf for all healing scourges, for all alacrity DPS scourges in PvE, and also DPS scourges that wanted to have some kind of pull. 600 is still a huge pull, but it's way less than 1200 obviously, and this was, especially in World vs. World, really annoying actually. So I think this is a big nerf, but it makes sense. The Spectral Ring change, nothing too crazy, a few seconds of cooldown off, nothing crazy. And then the cast time reduction of consumed conditions is also nothing crazy. No one used that skill for the most part. I think it's fair to buff it. Also the healing, I guess that's fine. And then we get more healing from Soul Eater, which is the trait in Reaper. And I think 5% more in PvP. It will not make Power Reaper matter, but I think it's a fair buff for sure. Yeah, I think the changes to Necromancer, those two here, are actually quite big nerfs to Zerg Necromancer. I would agree with you, Roaming Spirit. I wouldn't say that they are changing Necromancer and you can't play it anymore, but it's definitely something that was used. And now it's a little bit, you know, should I still use this or is it not worth it anymore? I think that makes sense, but I think you would not drop the Necromancer just because of those, but it makes it a little bit less insane how much utility you can bring with the pulse. I guess that makes sense. I think that's completely fair. I think Ranger just got a big nerf to Spear. You know, they just buffed Spear in PvE and now they nerf it again. The power coefficients go down. I think that makes sense. It was extremely strong as a weapon. I'm not sure if it's still the best weapon. Probably, maybe. I don't know. They seem quite harsh, the nerfs. But let's see if it's really that high of effect. I don't know. Then we get some changes to traits, which is actually really interesting. So they now change some traits like Brutal Seal, Spotter, Taste for Danger to be more specific to pets. So that means you get some effect when you take this trait. For example, deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies, grant fury to nearby allies when you use a beast skill. But it will also grant your pets of a specific species, for example, feline, bird, and drakes, will now get additional crit chance and strike damage when you take this trait. Which is really interesting because that means that you take a trait that gives you a buff for your beast skill, for example. And if you then take the correct pet, you will get an additional buff. I think that's a really cool idea of a trait. I personally think it's a little bit annoying that you have specific things, for example, are in specific trait lines. So for example, this is in skirmishing, this is in wilderness survival, and this is marksmanship. If you want to take, for example, marksmanship, but you want to have a spider for whatever reason, then you have to use wilderness survival to buff it. I mean, for the most part, it makes sense. If you're playing Condi, you will probably use this wilderness survival trait line and you will use the spiders, probably. But I think I always am a little bit locking out traits that buff stuff that might be useful for other trait lines as well is a little bit annoying. But I think it's a fun interaction of having two things with one trait that makes sense. I think that's cool. I think those are really interesting changes for sure. I'm not sure if it will affect the meta in any way, because you will probably run the same traits, or for the most part, and you will probably run the same pets, but I guess it's still fine. I like it. Yeah. This is just straight up a buff to Allies 8. I guess that's fine. And Beast Warden is also, yeah, a little bit of a buff, just like the other traits. Now gives Ursan and Porcine pets a little bit more health and strike damage. I guess that's fine. So Ranger overall, I would say spear nerfs, and other than that, just buffs straight up. So Revenant, they buff power-based Renegade and Vindicator in PvE. I think that makes sense. They were both builds that were not that crazy performing. Overall, we get a lot of Renegade buffs. I think that makes sense. It's not a very used elite spec for the most part. It was really hard nerfed in World vs. World, and since then it was only used in PvE, I would say. So I think those buffs just help it. It will not change how much you will see it, just because it still provides alacrity in PvE, and it still somewhat is a annoying DPS. But yeah, that's about it. And we get one change to make Vindicator a bit better. I guess that makes sense. It's a little bit more damage, but it's still a melee build with no utility. So I think it will also not change too much if Vindicator will be meta, but it is a big damage change. So I think that might help to get the number up for sure. We get also Burst of Strength, that is the facet skill of Herald, just a little bit more damage. I think that helps for PvP, of course. Herald is already quite good as a DPS, and now in World vs. World you can use it as a quite nice roamer as well. I guess that's fine. We get an interesting change here that Rolling Miss now grants percentage of outgoing critical strike damage into healing. I'm not sure how much it will be, probably not as high, maybe 1 to 4%, something like that I expect. It's very good actually, I would say, especially if you use that in PvE, where you can deal quite a lot of damage. That can be really fun as a solo build. In PvP and World vs. World, I think it's a nice trait to take, but I'm not sure how much it will be. Yeah. Charge Miss, just a little buff, and other than that, a few changes to some weapon skills, nothing too crazy, I would say. I would say Revenant overall, almost only buffs. Yeah, I think it's only buffs. It's actually nice to see Revenant buff. Thief is interesting because they now give Shadow Sep, which is the Scepter 2 skill, a blast finisher. I made a guide about Healing Spectre just a week ago or something, and this is a crazy good buff, I have to be honest, because blast finishers was one of the things that you don't have access too frequently if you're not into Shroud, but with this one you have it. It's actually insane. You can use it so easily with Relic of Karakosa now, because you can spam your 2 skill and proc this Relic consistently. It's actually crazy. It's a huge buff for Electricity Heal Spectre, or for all Spectres actually for that matter. You don't have to play heal to make use out of a blast finisher. You can blast stealth more easily. It's actually a big buff in all game modes as well, because stealth blasting can help you as a roamer in PvP and World vs. World too. It's actually really good. Then we got some changes to those 2 skills and nerfs in PvE. I guess that's fine. And we get a backstab buff. That's interesting, and which is for all game modes here. And oh no, this one is only PvP and World vs. World, as well as the improvisation buff. I mean, that makes sense. Just underused things should get buffed. I think that makes sense. And just across the board, underused things get buffed. I guess the thieves can be happy. I think most thieves will also be happy about the Blinding Powder chest. At least I am, because this was an instant skill back there in the old days, and now it has a cast time with stability access. I think that's really annoying. I don't like stun break skills that have a cast time, and now it will get back to instant cast and has no longer stability. I think the stability loss is of course sad, but that it's instant is really nice. That's what you like, because you can then stealth while you cast something else. It's really nice. That's what you want. So I think Thief overall, just very happy. Nothing too sad about it, I would say. Warrior, last spec to talk about. So just a lot of World vs. World changes again. Snap pull, martial cadence. I mean, it makes sense. Martial cadence is interesting because it now grants stability instead of quickness. So they really want to go hard on removing quickness in World vs. World, or making it less available. And the stability is actually also nice. So I think that's a good trait to some extent. It's a little bit hard to come by with martial cadence. In that sense, you can't really trigger it that easily when you want to, but it's nice, I guess. And Berserker stands up, nice. I think it's good. Just 1 second underused skill. It's good, I think. Yeah. And then a lot of changes to Berserker, mostly the actual, how's it called, burst skills. So Arc Divider DPS down, Slicing Maelstrom DPS down, and increased the number of boons removed in PvE and PvP. Probably not changing anything. Again, Rupturing Smash power coefficients up in PvP will not change anything. Flaming Flurry, power coefficient up will also not change a lot, I would say. Blood Reckoning, you reduce the cooldown. That's actually good. That's the healing skill. 5 seconds off. That's probably a big buff, I would say. Yeah. For all game modes, actually. You used it in a lot of builds in PvE. And if you wanted to go crazy in PvP and World vs. World, you actually can use it as well. So I think that's a good buff. Dead or Alive, again, 1 second more. Probably a really good buff. So I think I see Berserker in all game modes getting buffed for the most part. Is actually really helpful, I would say. Yeah. Burst of Regression just right now applies Fury in addition to its previous effects. That's really nice. That helps a lot of builds to just get more Fury. I think that's really good. I think overall Berserker is really happy with this. Of course, you get some damage nerf in World vs. World with Arc Divider, but it was also a very good DPS pick there. So I guess that's fair. And lastly, we get Break Enchantments, reduce the power coefficients. Yeah, World vs. World Break Enchantments is really, really good. So I think the power coefficient nerf makes sense. It will still be played, don't worry about it. It will just be a little bit less DPS. Overall, I think Warrior, just World vs. World nerfs, other than that PvP and PvE buffs. So I think overall, Warriors can be quite happy, I would say. Yeah, no Blade Zone buffs. Like I said, I think they have to rework a lot of stuff that is really, really underused, like Blade Zone, like Viva and stuff. And they will not rework. This patch is just very small. It's just number changes. I think the number changes for the most part are okay. I like the direction where they're going. For the most part, they will not change a lot. The meta will stay the same. But it's at least a tuning update that we get. And I think that's fair. Some overperforming stuff gets notched down. Some underperforming stuff gets a little bit buffed. So I think that's fair. But I was also really hoping for big reworks of really underused specs. Because that's, in my opinion, something that really is missing the last few patches, for sure. So overall, I think the patch is decent, but just very small in what it actually changes. That's my general gist of it. Yeah, I think this is the only change where I would say the direction is actually really weird to me. Why would you buff Elementalist weapon in PvE, the hammer one? Because it's not that used in, let's say, a lot of raid builds, but it is extremely broken in solo builds. It's actually it's crazy, you know. In a Celestial Catalyst that's already insanely easy to play and very strong, you just buff it with hammer again. This is insane. My builds that I just posted, the solo builds and the one for all build for Elementalist, now get even better. Okay, I guess I take it, but I didn't see that one coming, I have to be honest, because it was really already a really good weapon. Let me know your opinions in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to leave a like. And if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch, and Patreon. Thanks, Malice. Thanks, Lane. And I hope to see you all in the next video.